Check, check. Check, check. Ah, perché ci vuole tempo forse. Ah, perfetto.
Sì, c'è il delay di... Oddio. C'è il delay di 20 secondi così la... Cioè 10 secondi.
10 secondi quindi è. No, 20.
È massimo 20, ma per dargli un po' più di...
Ok, perfetto. Ah, io l'ho già avviata, va bene?
Sì, riesci magari a mutarla adesso perché parliamo...
Sì.
Cioè solo per adesso, perché siamo qua così.
Allo.
Ok. Ma quante cose devi premere?
Sta acceso forever.
Si sente? A
Sì,
posto.
l'audio è buono. Spero che non abbia le pile che si scaricano.
C'ha le pile, ma abbiamo le pile. Ma tipo manco schiacciando. Ah vabbè, sì. Ah. Aspetta, aspetta. Ah, questo ha solo due opzioni.
Tieni premuto. Vai, vai, ancora.
Hello. The video stops suddenly. Welcome everybody. On behalf of the entire team of the Agency for Peacebuilding, let me welcome you to the third and last day of the Bologna Peacebuilding Forum. Today we have a symposium realized in collaboration with the Italian Network for International Mediation, whose title is Advancing Mediation in a Multipolar World. We'll be together all day long until 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And after that, we'll have a closing talk from 6 to 7, a dialogue between the activist Ramon Caram and the journalist Costanza Spocci. I hope you have an interesting and fruitful discussion today with these outstanding panelists. And without further ado, I give the floor to the first speakers for the welcome addresses. Thank you very much.
You hear me? Yes. Right. Okay, I want to welcome you as well, you know, after the forum here in Villa, because this is it's a location that the municipality of Bologna has really wanted to have for many years, because it's in a park that, you know, we want to regenerate. It's the heart of the city center, green heart of the city center, that, you know, we want to also see as a place where we can, you know, deal with, you know, the challenges that the city is facing, like, you know, having reforestation, having social inclusion, you know, like a big square, in a way, big green square where people can meet and use the city and also debate about important things like this morning. So anyway, good morning, everyone. I'm Annalisa Boni. I'm deputy mayor in the municipality of Bologna. I have many portfolios, but one of them is, of course, international relations. That's why I'm sitting here. And I want to really welcome you here, but also thank and be grateful to the forum itself, because it's become a very, I'm very affectionate. I'm very interested every year to see what's on the table and which theme is selected to this, you know, annual appointment that the forum is organizing. It's always fantastic. And this one, this morning, this day actually, a very important event with you know, the network of the Italian Network of International Mediation, RIMI. I'm always used to call it RIMI, so I was looking for the acronym, and of course the MAECI, another acronym, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for putting together this incredible program and to create space and knowledge to talk about mediation. Because I think that mediation is not talked about enough. We talk about defense. I mean, I'm just coming back from Brussels, from the EU, and, you know, it's all about defense, and how do we organize ourselves to defend ourselves, and so on. And so, you know, the mainstream discussions is how do we arm ourselves, how do we defend ourselves, how do we protect our borders, and not enough, I think, energy and discussions are, and knowledge and dialogue and conversations are, you know, focused on mediation. So we need, I think, mediation like we need air, and so I really welcome the theme of today because it's really, really important. So, and it's interesting because you put together different angles. I mean, if you look at the program, it's like 360 degrees analysis, and yeah, you look at the professional, institutional, strategic elements, yeah, of mediation, like as a tool for conflict prevention, let's say. So it's really, really, I'm really grateful for creating this space. The second thing I want to just remind, many of you already know, but maybe not all, Bologna is of course active in the international scene, as a municipality can be, because of course it's not our competence, it's the ministry who has the competence, and the state who has the competence on international relations in the sense of, you know, foreign affairs in the classical meaning of the word and of the policy, but still I think cities can play a very important role in international relations. That's why we are the only municipality in Italy, and I hope that other municipalities will follow through. We are the only one who has adopted a strategic plan for European and international action, which means a plan of action, something concrete with, you know, very concrete steps and actions, but strategic. So something that really wants to put forward and recognize the role of cities and municipalities in, you know, the governance of big challenges, because challenges are all are all big, are all macro, are all global, you know, big global phenomena like climate, for instance, or migration, or but they become local, and they express themselves, and they concentrate, by the way, all together as a poly challenge at the local level. So working with cities on board in terms of, you know, how we deal, how we govern global challenges is very important for us. So that's why we, you know, we're strong believers of city diplomacy next to the national diplomacy, of course, because of course, and now this period really like is so, it's like, I don't want to say that, but it's like a laboratory of craziness. But it's, you know, fragmented, multipolar, no rules, you know, it's like, where are we? You lose all, you know, all the safe things that in a way kept the sort of relations more or less like playing a game, but you know what the rules are. Here it's, you know, very complicated. And so cities, in a way, can be political entities that can be and can be capable of, in a way, weaving pragmatic and human networks of dialogues. You know, we always say, but sorry, that's my thing, but some people laugh, and I don't want to offend any government, but I always say states create walls, make walls, cities make love. But it's a bit, I understand it's a bit informal and just as a joke. But I mean, we really as cities create borders, on the contrary, create bonds across borders. We have networks of cities in many situations, like for instance, on the refugee crisis that we've had in the years. We've had welcoming cities, we've had cities of refuge, you know, and we've been working together to see how, you know, how can we help each other on that. And, you know, daily we are laboratories, or, you know, in a way, yeah, laboratories where coexistence is tested and it's implemented every day. Yeah, so it's really like, lived in real terms. And so, yeah, so our international actions doesn't want to be a sort of formal thing or a formal exercise. It really wants to be a political tool to promote democracy, inclusion, cohesion, and also injustice and across borders. So yeah, that's it. so in this framework, just to connect, and then I'll close because I could talk for hours and I don't want to kill you. We translate in this context of the peace, you know, talking about peace and the work of the forum. We translate our commitment in international relations in terms of peace, promotion and mediations with cooperation initiatives, as I said before, and also with a real authentic belief in the power of peace education. Yeah, so education on peace, for us, it's very important. It's not me who has this delegation, it's my colleague Daniele Ara who is in charge of that, and he works extensively with schools and institutions at the local level that, you know, need to be always reminded of the need to, you know, talk about these things. And I think that, as I said before, it's such a complex times, so difficult times, that it's really key to learn ourselves as institutions, but also citizens, how to navigate through complexities. And you need different instruments than before. I mean, if you look at the reality today, it's so, you know, complicated, complex, difficult. I think it's one of the most complex times of our history, contemporary history. So, looking at what instruments can help kids, young, and also old people to, you know, learn to navigate through times, it's important. So, yeah, I think peace education as a how do you say, prerequisite for mediation is really like the key, one of the key elements, because it means supporting civil society, supporting everyone, collaborating with universities, with, you know, all the different stakeholders to, you know, to really help and give a voice to those that work on reconciliation and on these things. So, I think that the theme of today is really key. I'm so happy. I would love to stay the whole day and learn so much, but I'll get all the material from Bernardo. But luckily, I will have to leave you because tomorrow it's the Festa dell'Europa. It's the first time that Bologna has a Festa dell'Europa. I really want to have a collective day. So whoever happens to be here tomorrow is very welcome. We have a full day of things, dialogues, talks, happy, also funny, but also serious initiatives. And so, I will have to leave you. But still, I'm so grateful, really, to all of those that have worked to make this day a very interesting day. So thank you very much, and I'm all ears till I'm here.
Joanna, good morning, everybody. You know, I would spend the next half hour commenting the words of the Deputy Mayor. So many inputs and inspirational phrases. If you allow me, I will quote the Laboratory of Craziness, because I think it's a perfect representation of the times. But I want to, first of all, congratulate you and the municipality of Bologna for creating these spaces and making them possible. I was here a few years ago and it didn't look like this, so I'm really impressed. Congratulations on that. At this very moment in the program, I'm sitting here to represent my Director General and Deputy SG, Cecilia Piccioni, so I will not dwell on the many things that have been said. I trust that we will have the opportunity to explore them in more depth during the day, in particular city diplomacy, the, let's say, defense discourse versus the mediation discourse, the power of peace education. I think all of these are very relevant items in the menu of the peace mediation, And let me tell you that Rimi has the ambition to do all these things or to systematize all these things. I'm replacing Cecilia because State Secretary Rubio is in Rome today, so she's a bit busy at the moment. And I will now read her address. It is a real pleasure to be part of this event, even though in a more indirect way than I had hoped. I would like to begin by thanking all those who made it possible, the municipality of Bologna and the Bologna Peacebuilding Forum for hosting this initiative in a city that has long stood for dialogue and civic engagement. 3IM, Wise Italy, and the Agency for Peacebuilding for their tireless work in connecting institutions and civil society. The Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna for anchoring Rimi in academic excellence and independence. I must quote Luca Fratini and his team for their vision and commitment, and the European External Action Service for the attention and support shown to this initiative. Above all, thank you to all the partners gathered here today, because mediation is never the work of one actor alone. It is built through cooperation, trust, and shared responsibility. So why is it so important to have you gathered in Bologna today? Because the world is becoming more fragmented, more polarized, and more exposed to overlapping crises. In this environment, mediation is not a soft option or a diplomatic luxury. It is a strategic necessity. For Italy, this is not a new ambition. It reflects a broader tradition of engagement rooted in dialogue, bridge building, conflict prevention, and support for international cooperation. At the heart of our foreign policy lies a clear conviction that multilateralism remains indispensable and very dear to my heart after 5 wonderful years at the United Nations spent learning how much it matters. And precisely in moments of crisis, when international institutions are under pressure and geopolitical tensions deepen, our task is not to step away from multilateralism, but to strengthen it, adapt it, and where necessary, reform it, so that it remains effective and credible. I'd like to focus on 3 key words that highlight the importance of mediation and the role Italy can play. The first word is fragmentation. Conflicts today are increasingly complex. They involve not only states, but also non-state actors, inequalities, disinformation, climate stress, and deep social fractures. No institution can address this complexity alone. This is why mediation today must be intersectoral, bringing together governments, academia, civil society, technical experts, and local actors. Rimi was created precisely with this objective, to build a national ecosystem capable of supporting mediation in a structured, coordinated, and lasting way. My second word is proximity. Italy is uniquely positioned to play a leading role because we are not distant observers of the crisis around us. The Mediterranean, the Sahel, the Western Balkans, the Horn of Africa, and the Near and Middle East are regions with which we share geographic, historical, economic, and human ties. This proximity gives Italy credibility and access. Our country has long cultivated a diplomatic profile based on dialogue, humanitarian engagement, and the ability to work across divides without being perceived primarily through the lens of geopolitical competition. In mediation, this matters enormously. Trust is often the decisive currency. My third and last word is continuity. Mediation is not built through headlines or one-off initiatives. It requires patience, institutional memory, long-term partnerships, and sustained political investment. In an era dominated by immediacy and permanent crisis management, continuity itself has become strategic. Rimi represents precisely this commitment, an investment in long-term expertise, networks, and partnerships that can strengthen both Italian and European mediation efforts over time. This is also where Italy can make a distinctive contribution within the broader European framework. Italy's added value lies precisely in its ability to combine diplomatic outreach with a broader ecosystem that includes institutions, academia, civil society, and independent expertise. Ultimately, mediation is not the alternative to effective international action. It is what makes effective international action possible. In a fragmented world where mistrust and polarization are accelerating, mediation helps preserve the very conditions that allow multilateralism to function: dialogue, cooperation, and the search for shared solutions. And that is why initiatives such as RIMI matter, not only for Italy, but for the wider international community. I thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Cervi, and I'm here representing RIMI, and many colleagues that I'm sure you are going to meet during today. I'm conscious of time because we have a panel starting soon, and I want to build on what was the introduction already done by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Let me bring you, though, first to Aleppo in December 2016. It was almost 10 years ago, and it was the aftermath of a tremendous bombing from the Assad regime on the east of the city that changed control at that time. And I found myself, I don't really even know how, in a half-destroyed building sitting across a former university professor. There was silence. I think we were more shocked, I guess, by what we saw that day. And at some point, I was there working with the Norwegian Refugee Council, so RIMI and this initiative was not even in the making. But at that point, this professor looked at me and said, "I know you are Italian. Can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Yes, of course." And he said, "Where have Italy and Italians been in all these years of war in Syria? Where your researchers, where your archaeologists, where your NGOs, where the civil society, the cities, all the bonds that actually kept us together for decades and centuries? How did this happen, and where was Italy and where was Europe?" I didn't have any intelligent answer to that, to be honest, and I don't expect me to elaborate on what happened next. But that question stayed with me, because I knew we were there. There was massive effort from the whole European community to actually support the Syrian society at diplomatic level in terms of aid and so on and so forth. We were there, but we were not there. And I guess the why is because in crisis of this scale, individual efforts, no matter how heroic, they dilute. They become invisible. They fail to aggregate into kind of a strategic presence, what could preserve decades and centuries of brotherly relations that are key to prevent and resolve conflict. So I guess this consciousness is not just mine, is not just coming from that episode, it comes across the initiative of RIMI, and it came out over and over again also in the last 2 days of the Bologna Peacebuilding Forum through very, very interesting discussion. And so RIMI tries to address what is perceived to be a gap. It's a hybrid mediation unit, and it wants to support in advancing what dialogue should do when a conflict is about to start, when it started, and when its end is not in sight. It wants to be flexible, it wants to be relevant, and it wants to be helpful. This is what together we are trying to build. It hasn't started in 2024 in a vacuum. It comes from a long tradition of commitments, both from the institution as well as from the civil society and university. An example is the Mediterranean Women Mediation Network that was funded in 2017 as part of an initiative of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And it wants to be in dialogue with national and international institutions and realities that are working in the same direction. Now, mediation is not about staying in a comfort zone by nature, it's about being outside of a comfort zone. And so talking, exploring what we need to do now in these situations at global level in terms of international mediation, I would argue that is not a reactive necessity to what is changing globally around us. No, it's not just that, at least. It's actually a forward-looking responsibility. It's a forward-looking responsibility to, as a start, future generations that do not deserve to inherit yet another broken system. How do we embrace that responsibility? By reflecting, by working together, by actually joining efforts and trying to move boundaries that now seems to be like stone and fixed. So let me conclude. Again, I'm mindful of time, but there are a few, actually 3 questions that I leave you with, and I would be happy to see discussed during the day, formally or informally. First, what are we not yet doing that we should be doing? Second, with whom are we not engaging that we should engage with? And third, in whose interests are we going to do international mediation? I will leave you with those reflections. I will borrow what was said by Annalisa. This is a space, this is an opportunity to have a space and knowledge to talk about mediation. And let me add to that and to put it into action. Thank you very much.
Allo, allo. Ah, sì. Buongiorno. Good morning, everybody. I am the moderator of this panel, which I'm extremely happy to have been tasked with this responsibility. I've heard a lot of, I will speak very briefly. I want to give space to my distinguished panelists to express their view. In the introductory session, I've heard a lot of things that actually overlaps with what I wanted to say, so I will not repeat. There is one thing I want to insist of. We are living in a world, and they've been repeated by the Vice Major and by Anna and by Luca. We live in a world that is changing so fast. The pillars that actually were our compacts of the work of mediation, of diplomacy, are crumbling or are being destroyed willingly by what were once the actor who built those pillars. This situation creates confusion, anxiety, it's been termed like complexity. What we are living in is a transition. A paradigm is falling, and we are not even seeing a new paradigm for dialogue, diplomacy, or mediation. And this created the sort of difficulties of tracing a path through these times. This, for anybody and everyone who works in diplomacy or mediation, this must pose specific questions on where we stand. How do we position ourselves in this type of environment that is actually very difficult to frame? And I'm very happy of discussing this type of question with this panel, because they represent very different perspectives, and allow me to very briefly introduce the people. Elisabeth Alber, she basically represents the academic world. Researcher, a lot of experience, and have a specific perspective on mediation and this type of. On the other side, we have Luca Frattini, you already know, is an Italian national institution. Daniel Gerlach, over here, well, actually, is a very complex professional personality. He's a journalist, a researcher, and I understand also a documentary maker, and a lot of experience in the Middle East. There is a geographic focus there. Lara Scarpitta, she is embodied the multilateral world that is struggling in this period, working as a senior gender advisor at the OSCE. And last but not least is Lamberto Zanier. Ambassador Lamberto Zanier, I will not list all the things you have done, Lamberto, but he, I think, represent the probably historical memory of the past decades, because he has been navigating all the crises that our world has seen in many, many years. But I will start immediately, and allow me to renew your awareness of time and timekeeping. I will be kind of thing. But I would like to think, starting with the title of this panel, is Rebuting International Mediation. And I would like to ask, and I would like to follow the line of the table, what exactly needs to be rebuked in international mediation, considering what we have said. And I'm happily leaving the word to Elizabeth. Do you have that?
Is this on? Yeah. No. Now it's on, okay. So thank you very much for having me here. It's a big question, and I promised I will try to stick to the 5-6 minutes. I'm coming from the academia. I'm coming from an academia called URAC Research, positioned in the very north part of Italy, in Bolzano, Bozen city, which is in South Tyrol, and South Tyrol has a very peculiar history within Italy, because it has now also, it has managed first to settle a conflict which could have been much worse, and it has now a very peculiar subnational autonomy system where you basically, in a consociational way, share powers between linguistic groups, and it also has a bridge function between the north and the south, and it is often very much used as a best practice example or a good example on how to channel conflicts and how to work in mediation. This being said, when I got this question, I said, like, okay, I have I would like to try to make us reflect on how we define international mediation, if we look at what is discussed in academia. And definitely I'm aware of the fact that most of you know it, but just to set the scene, basically we're moving away from the concept of liberal peacemaking. So if we want to stick to these three approaches that are discussed right now, it's first liberal peacemaking, the role of mediators that actually then strive to have procedural fairness, inclusivity, incremental confidence building. Confidence building was also key to settle the conflict on the South Tyrolean issue within the Italian regionalist constitutional system. But all this liberal peace building approach is kind of becoming a bit more secondary, if you allow me to say so, because the other two approaches are kind of adding up. And that is, one approach is power-based coercion within mediation, where you then have kind of, the objective is not really democratic governance, but it's first and foremost stabilization and strategic stabilization. How do you do that? By the principles of the sticks. And the third approach would then be transactional bargaining. Within a new global order, transactional bargaining meaning in very concrete terms that by mobilizing incentives, you rely on the carrots principle and you make a deal, let's say. I mean, we have all the examples, we know. I mean, if you look at the US and all the moves, if we look at the very recent moves in the US, in the DRC, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, with regard to also taking up dialogue with the rebel groups of M23 and so on, because of the natural resources. Obviously, this is very strategic, and this would fall into this third category of transactional bargaining within a renewed global order. So all this, not to say that there is a decline in international mediation, because you can look into different data sets and you will see it's not a decline of the mediation, it's rather an increase of the conflicts. So of course we don't have here the time to go into all the nuances, at least not with this first input. But we are increasingly from an academic from the study part of view, in a dilemma that we know that from democratic theory there's no wars between democracies. So if we have liberal democracies, you don't have wars. But on the other hand, we know also that increasingly either groups of regional powers that are not anymore, in our understanding, categorized as full liberal democracies are becoming significant brokers in international mediation. So, I mean, it's China vis-a-vis Myanmar. They just also convinced some of the groups to put down the arms and to enter the ceasefire. And again, it's kind of authoritarian regimes that become more relevant in the scene of international mediation. And this rise of non-Western and region-based autocratic mediators with mostly a focus and an interest in strategic mediation poses questions to us as academics. If we then bridge, if we enter consultancy work and we work in the praxis, and in general to the international mediators world. And what are these questions, these dilemmas? It's to ask ourselves how we deal with project requests coming from consortia that include actors that stick rather to the approach of power-based coercion mediation, or to the approach of transactional bargaining mediation. Because if we start from, we are firmly convinced about the liberal peacemaking approach, then we have this dilemma. We would like to still open and work for dialogue platforms, but we have a dilemma because increasingly also actors and forces are basically those that are not fully liberal democracies that bring forward also mediation and international cooperation projects.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, very much, because you actually gave structure to what were the thoughts I wanted to make at the beginning of this. And thank you very much, because you really pointed out what are, you know, the boundaries of the problems we are facing. I'm happy to give to someone who has a completely different perspective, because it doesn't come from academia, even if I'm sure you are doing as well research work. So please, Daniel, the question remains the same. What needs to be rebutted in international mediation?
Thank you very much. It's actually my first time in Bologna. And to add another level of complexity, more confusing to your introduction, Gabriela, I happen to also have worked in the world of mediation for the last 10 years. What a coincidence. So the documentary, the journalism was one persona of mine, but the track 2 and mediation work I did was mainly happening in Syria, and for reasons you can understand, we tried to keep this as discreet as possible. What is needed to reboot this? Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for the theoretical groundwork you did, because I sometimes feel, and I encounter a lot of people who talk about mediation, and it's kind of very fashionable also in Europe to fancy mediation. I sometimes feel that when we go to the Middle East, which is my turf, the world that I've been working in for the last 25 years, people have a very different notion from what it is to be a mediator, to mediate. And certainly it has absolutely nothing to do with what you refer to as liberal peacemaking. Yeah. And that's not because societies are not liberal, it's because mediation is so deeply rooted in the tradition of the region. In the absence of a strong central power, of a superior judicial force, let's say, of course, you always need to refer to a mediator who understands what are the limits, who understands what are your boundaries, and also how far he can go without any side losing face. Now, I recently attended, this is a Chatham House event, right? Or is how public are we? Okay. I recently attended a meeting in Brussels where one state representative said, like, you know, now we have all these Gulf states taking over mediation. And they are new to this world. And I looked at him and I said, if you understand the history of the Middle East, you would understand that mediation has been part of the DNA of this region. Qatar, long before it actually existed, negotiated with international supreme powers like the Portuguese Empire, the British Empire, the Safavids, later on the Americans, of course not as the state of Qatar, but as tribal leaders. The first delegation of the FLN that negotiated with the French the treaties of Evian met in the house of the Qatar, the holiday house of the Qatari emir in Switzerland. So, and then they were transferred to the negotiations in a helicopter. So, this world is not, you know, not new to mediation. We are the ones who are rather new to mediation. I think what we need to understand in order to make this meaningful, and I really commend and appreciate the initiative, and I also see that Italy is now coming out on mediation. Italy was absent from the world of mediation because mediation also comes with funding and comes with structural support. The Italians were not absent from the conflict scenes. The Italians had the most courageous journalists on the ground. I don't know, Anna said that Italian NGOs and peacemakers were absent. The journalists were not. Courageous people who reported what was going on the ground. I also understand that in Italy, very often when you talk about mediation from a government perspective, you mean facilitation. My understanding, without being involved in many of the secret dealings, is that the spirit is more, you put people into one room and then you tell them sort it out, but you don't give a direction where you want the mediation to go. Because it's also part of the liberal peacemaking idea that you should not prejudice or preempt the result of this. 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, let's say, after the downfall of the Soviet Union and with the emergence of the liberal order, people tended to believe that everyone wants to be like us. The Oslo Accords were negotiated in an environment where the facilitators believed everyone wants to be a liberal democracy. It's just a question of creating the right spirit, the right environment, and the Camp David negotiations between the last chance, basically, where Bill Clinton tried to negotiate a deal between Yasser Arafat and Ehud Barak, were conducted in the same spirit. We just have to set the scene, we just have to create the right atmosphere, people need to trust each other, and then we go the right way. What both negotiators didn't understand, that the foundational assumptions of their negotiation was asymmetrical and was unjust. They did not realize that maybe one of the negotiating parties might be screwed over during this deal. And I think this is something you really need to bear in mind. When you engage in mediation, it's not just enough to do a no harm assessment. You need to have like a very, very profound knowledge about the potential consequences of the process in order to make it credible, in order also to be able to support the result yourself politically. And I think the answer is like, what needs to be done? Europe has a fantastic like network of civil society, academic institutions that engage in this, and the European Union that can support these initiatives beyond, let's say, day-to-day politics. Because what I see traveling the member states of the European Union with a project called EPICON, which I chair, which is an Israeli-Palestinian European trilateral dialogue, we see different priorities in all the member states, and from one election to the other it changes. Sometimes it's rational, sometimes it's less rational, sometimes it's foreign policy oriented, and sometimes it's just domestic policies. 1 minute. And the perfect, let's say, the cooperation between the European Union as an institution and the civil society is that it can afford, it has a longer breadth, it can afford to go beyond day-to-day politics in the member states. However, the role of the member states in this process is absolutely essential. Because I can tell you, last week, I've been working on Israel-Palestine dialogue, and I bring Israelis and Palestinians to Europe who then talk about, you know, Europe changing their policies and in playing a constructive role. And the same day, my foreign minister in Germany, all due respect to him, receives the Israeli foreign minister, and it feels like he lives in an absolute parallel universe. Parallel universe, rhetorically, absolutely, completely disconnected from the reality on the ground and from the role that Europeans should play, and from the positions that Europeans have signed off on, like unanimously. All the member states support a two-state solution and a Palestinian self-determination, and still we are struggling on this level with the member states. So we need to make sure that the member states play an active role, coordinate with civil society and with each other, and always bear in mind, what do I want to do? Do I just want to facilitate a meeting? Do I just want to set the scene? Or do I really have a vision, an idea where the process of mediation should lead to? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. I think you kind of open up many areas, one of which I will not enter, but one of which I think about how we perceive, you know, the new actors in mediation has a lot more to do with the kind of glasses we use to look at the world rather than the reality itself of what is going on. Thank you very much, and I'm happy, Lara, and well, you know, we spoke about the liberal system, etc. She represents the multilateral thing. Lara, please. Thank you very much. Same question.
No, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. Beautiful city, beautiful weather, but a hugely important topic on the table. And I think today, and I'm of course very proud that Italy is championing this agenda, both as an Italian but also in my role in the OEC. I was thinking about your question, what do we have to do about rebooting international mediation, thinking it from the OEC perspective, from a multilateral perspective, but also building on my experience in the past. And in the longer version of your question, you had listed a number of things: political will, accountability, inclusivity, and of course, all the elements that you had listed are important. But I think one thing that, for me, what needs to be rebooted in general, to rethink and make mediation effective, is the way we understand peace, the very same concept of peace. There is, for a number of reasons, an overwhelming focus on somehow to understand peace as the end of armed conflict. So also when we do mediation, and rightly so, one of the priorities of mediators at all levels is to stop the violence, because we know what conflict cause. But that is not enough. That is not having peace. But the quick fix is very often what we stop or what we see, that's where it stops. But investing into the positive peace, this is very much academic concept, but it is a reality actually. The need to build on respect for human rights and social contract and rebuild countries, build on the concept of positive peace, then I think we fell short of that. I worked on Syria for over 11 years, and that conflict started because the social contract and the human rights of the population was broken down, were violated, and the social contract was broken down by the Assad regime, and it took them 14 years to have what they have now, which is an extremely fragile situation. So when we're looking at rebooting in mediation, and rebooting means rethinking the concept of peace, also means, in my view, looking more also in more details when we're doing mediation at the root causes of conflict. Are we looking enough at the root causes of the conflict? And this is general consideration. Looking at the root causes of the conflict also means investing more in conflict prevention. Now, the organization that I work for is an organization whose top priority is conflict. One of the key objectives of the organization of the OEC is, of course, ensuring that cooperation and security is achieved through comprehensive security, is achieved through dialogue, through trust, driven by principles of preventing conflicts and reoccurring. So using dialogue and using trust as is key tools. And the prevention of conflict, I think this is one area where more needs to be brought in when we are working on mediation. More mediation needs to be done at a local level in preventing conflicts at different levels of tensions, when the tensions arise. I also want to, another point that I want to point out, that very often we see that especially international organizations, and now, of course, the multilateral system is under a lot of strain, so mediation is much more, is less carried out by international organizations, and therefore we are losing a lot of the legitimacy of the international order, and more by regional or individual states. But especially from an international perspective, and this is a self-reflection, we tend to do mediation a lot with some predefined templates. We follow very much the process design, what worked in one place should work in another. And the reality, this is not the case. So if you want to reboost and reboot mediation, international mediation, I think we have to be very realistic. So starting with a very good knowledge and grounding the mediation at different levels on the ground, so responding to the needs on the ground, And this also requires the participation, effective participation of the people on the ground, whether it's civil society, women's groups, youth organizations. It is very, very important to have this kind of really understanding. And just to conclude, because exactly, doing mediation in the Middle East means something very different to do mediation in South America, but certainly means something completely different in the concept of use of mediation in Europe.
Thank you, Lara. You touched a lot of things. One thing I found, it's like rethinking peace, and it came to my mind the art show that I saw last night, that is actually pose a very interesting question. The narrative of war is so powerful, so easy to, narrate war. The narrative of peace is not so easy. And the question, the art gallery, the art show that AP was organizing is actually, what is peace for you? And the difficulties of answering this question, and probably is, as you say, should be anything. What's the end game of what we do? And we still haven't answered that question. And Lamberto, please, I'm very curious to see how your wealth of experience will try to reply the question of rebooting international mediation.
Well, first of all, I have to say mediation means many things and can take place at many different levels. Okay. Sorry. So I was saying mediation means many things can take place at many different levels, and of course, so you need also to take that into account as you broach this subject of rebooting. My own experience in mediation is experience that is it flows from my role within international organizations, with the UN, with the OSCE, even with NATO in a period. What was key for my action within these organizations was what I would call the mandate. Basically, that is what gives you the legitimacy to operate as a mediator. It gives you the credibility, but it gives you the acceptance also of all sides. A mandate is by definition agreed by everybody, so you operate in an inclusive environment where everybody is consenting and is in a way accepting your role. And this gives you also possibility to interact with all the relevant actors. For instance, in Kosovo, I held a 6 months long negotiation was mediating between Pristina and Belgrade. And I found lots of blockages on the way. It was really difficult. But then I found those who encouraged me, and they gave me the job in a way. I found them able and willing to help me overcome those obstacles. So I would talk to the Russians, I would talk to the Americans, I would talk to the Europeans, looking at how they could jump in and use their own leverage with the sides to help me move towards what we saw the agreed objective of the negotiation and the agreed result of the negotiation. In that case, it was to bring in the European Union. We brought a European Union mission. And the result of that was that still in the Kosovo case, when Resolution 1244 was adopted in 2001, the Security Council split. And so there were very different views on the issue. But we managed to bring them together, and that was the first time after 7 years that the Security Council again approved and agreed on something related to Kosovo because everybody had been involved. So this creating this dynamic in an international organization of not only have the mandate, but then also having the support of individual member states to help a mediator to proceed and to in a transparent way. I always found the transparency very important, as I also found very important being, this also in relation to something I just heard, a mediator should never be too opinionated. It's good that one has a position, but what is really fundamental is the position of the sides. So really make sure that you help them talk to each other, even when they don't want to talk to each other, or when they don't want to listen to each other, let's say, and try to understand better and help them understand each other and find a common ground. And of course, you should have your own master plan, but that should not drive necessarily the process. The sides should feel that they are in the driving seat themselves. Coming to the rebooting is that the machine is broken. Multilateralism doesn't work anymore. Mandates, you don't get mandates so easily because you need decisions. Countries do not invest in multilateralism. They go alone, they take different paths. So this is a big problem that we have. So at that level, we need to start thinking more creatively. How can we replace that? We created mechanisms. When I was in Kosovo, I benefited from the UN Mediation Support Unit. I created in the OSCE, when I was Secretary General of the OSCE, a mediation support unit looking at how the UN had done it. But it's a mechanism that tends to run empty, because really there is no situation to which you can apply it. So how can we make up for that? Because mediation is something that is, as it was being pointed out by many today, is necessary more than ever today, given the fragmentation, the polarization, and the multiplication of conflicts. One way is the mandates that already exist. I could refer, and looking at Iraq, again, my job as High Commissioner on Minorities, which is a conflict prevention but also post-conflict reconciliation job. That is a function that carries on, continues. It has been agreed. The UN has political representatives in many countries that have roles that are related, again, to conflict or post-conflict situations. Now I think it is time to start building coalitions around these things. I remember when I was High Commissioner, I was working very independently. If I had that job now, I would start looking at many more interlocutors on the ground, civil society organizations, actors that can continue the work that I start doing. And one of the things that I noticed is that there is a body of expertise that has been developed on which these institutions, on the basis of which these institutions carry out their functions, that are not really known very much. So it is time to connect better, to connect the institutional level with the civil society and the grassroots levels, overcoming the suspicion that one might, in a way, complicate the life of the other, and looking for potential synergies. Still keeping and respecting mandates and positions.
I will stop you on these thoughts because I'm very happy that Luca is speaking after you, because he was one of the motor that brought to exactly an attempt, to linking all the different levels. And so without further ado, Luca, please, what do we need to do to rebuild international mediation?
You really give me a hard job to speak after Lamberto, but I will try to focus on your core question. In the framing question, you mentioned some of the tools that we might need to reboot. And you mentioned the political will, the tools, the methodology, etc. I think it's a combination of all of those, and definitely not in isolation. Both Elizabeth and Daniel have spoken about the actors. So I think it's important to start the reflection from there. Mediation players are now more than in the past. it's good not to refer to them as new players because it's totally ungrounded, as rightly said before. Let's call them non-Western, maybe. And what is a sure thing is that many of them carry different normative frameworks and values. So that is the issue we Europeans have to deal with. Some of them prioritize stability over justice, for example, and almost all of them prioritize elite agreements over inclusive processes, which is another issue. But in my view, the deepest deficit is not technical. The tools are there, and we have heard about it. It's a deficit of political will, and we have three people in a row here with an OSCE background, or even Lara is still in the OSCE. And I think in the last 10 years or so, the downward curve is visible, whereby participating states no longer invest in those multilateral institutions as much as they could have. So that's the main problem we have at hand, the lack of political will to invest in those tools, combined with, allow me to say, lack of institutional imagination or courage, or both. Because, you know, again, Chatham House, not Chatham House, I'll say it anyway.
It makes it more interesting.
Yes, go.
I wrote an article back in 2021 when I was director of the OSCE Office of the Secretary General on what was needed to reform the OSCE. This article was never published because they didn't get green light to publish it. So when I'm referring to lack of courage, it means literally that. Like the powers that be prefer to keep the situation that way because there might be some interest for certain big players to continue playing the way they are playing now, which is on a more individual basis rather than collectively. And this brings me to Rimi and what we are trying to do together. It's precisely that. So building on the words I pronounced before on Director Piccioni's behalf, we want to establish a system, an ecosystem, a structure based on a few features that Italy has and has always had, such as a recognized diplomatic tradition, a long-standing commitment to multilateral institutions, a history of being at crossroads of many civilizations, all of these things which allow Italy to be a credible player in the field of peace mediation. And RIMI was created to fill a structural gap because as it has been mentioned before, there's always been Italians around in the field of peace mediation, but never or almost never under the Italian flag in a recognizable manner. And let me just say one final word on the process that led to RIMI. It was conceived in 24, formalized in 25, and become operational in 26. So I think this is quite an achievement, considering how difficult it is sometimes to establish new structures and to give birth to some tangible activity beyond, declaratory speeches. So I think we have here the potential to contribute to the rebooting, although definitely we will not be doing this alone. So the idea, and I will quote Lamberto here when he spoke about coalitions, the idea is to put all these tools around the same objective, which is rebooting international mediation, together among those who believe in peace mediation and among those who believe that there is a European way to peace mediation, which is different to what other players are doing in the current, let's say, hyper-polarized geopolitical situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you, Luca, and thank all of you, because all of you kind of somehow introduced the focus of the next question. I've heard about, that suddenly we realize, oh, there are other people doing mediation that are not us, and with us I mean the Western world, which is already a way of thinking that is, we did a small conference on decolonization of mediation, because this type of assumption that we have, we do bring them in the room. But and you mentioned different actors involving, Lamberto in his experience says, if I had to redo it now, I would go look for other different people in the ground to see. So the next question is, who is still not in the room in terms of mediation, however we define mediation? I did a lot of field works, and I read a lot of documents with keywords like participation, participatory approach, women involvement. We have the president of the Women in International Security here, and the representative of the Mediterranean Network of Women Mediator, etc. And the youth, a lot of keywords around. When I'm in the field, I've very rarely seen they remain on papers most of the time, as that was my experience. I hope you can. So who is not in the room? And I will start again with Elizabeth. Who is not in the room, and how changing who's in the room might be the rebuilding we are looking for?
Yeah, it has been already said. Local actors with actual power to sustain whatever the outcomes of mediation processes are too little in the room. Because obviously also both academia, practitioners and so on always praise local ownership. But then mediation processes very often actually do not manage to put this into practice. So I would say the issue is in a mediation landscape that is decentralized, where you have regional coalitions that might not adhere to the diffusion of the liberal democracy norm, whatever it is. The biggest issue is coordination, and the biggest issue is to coordinate the actors and to pose the questions, what is peace for you and what is democracy for you? Because then we know how we can enter the scene and how to work with the actors who are there. And then ideally route back to positive peace and so on. The practical implication, in my view, from the experiences I had working mostly in Southeast Asia, and is basically that we need to go away from this search of restoring the consensus in our projects. We really need to work with the issues that the local actors bring along and connect them, and then basically, I'm coming back to what Daniel said also, be aware of the fact how we enter the scene. Pose ourselves the questions whether we know the context, whether we know the asymmetries, whether we know what certain terminology means in the very local languages, whether if we work with interpretation, whether we are sure that in the local language there is the glossary of the terminology I use. I remember a very first mission I did in Myanmar, and basically I was tasked to put together and then also to teach and facilitate a whole week on federal state building, democracy, democratization, and so on and so forth. So obviously my first question was, okay, it's going to be, there's a translator, but I need to know the Burmese language. Which terminology does the Burmese language have? Because otherwise, whatever I say from my academic angle, all the nice words I use, they cannot be really translated, and too many things get lost in translation. So coordination and coordination of plural views, I think, is very important, and this is done too little. So this needs to be in the room again. And from an academic point of view, we would, I favor to term it then to aim to have deliberative constitutionalism. So constitutionalism, basically the rule by law, or at least not the rule by force, not the rule by men, creating methods, procedures, and deliberative constitutionalism, that you create spaces where you have people that talk to each other and decide themselves what peace for them is and how democracy should look like for them. And this, to finish with two, I guess, suggestions, or at least from what I think could be suggestions, are first, I mean, in academia, there's a kind of a gap on a narrative deficit, in the sense that academia very often doesn't really report and analyze local actors' relevance in international mediation, or doesn't make practices travel, because they might be good or not good depending on the context. So let's call them practices. So academia could do much more in that sense. And for doing that, obviously, it should be much more connected also to international organizations that act on the ground, because then the data sets are connected better. And both academics and practitioners together, or also separately, should maybe also much more work in the sense of paying attention on what we can call network analysis. I mean, this is a method in social sciences, but we can also borrow all this method of social sciences and say, like, okay, we need to really be aware of the network we work with, and then we can start the work.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and I thank you particularly for your stress on the semantic we use. I am so deeply convinced words are so important, and sometimes if we don't understand the meaning we give to the words we use, it's going beyond. You really generate problems and trouble. And I'm happy, Daniel, if we can manage to, okay.
Yeah, and maybe we can also have a discussion about this aspect, especially Lamberto, you mentioned something, that the mediator should have a master plan, but should not impose opinions on the parties. I totally agree with this, but still, I think it's important to be informed on what's going on as a mediator. Look, who's in the room and who's not in the room depends on the urgency of the matter. If you want to create, like, I would have never called the work that I did mediation. I always called it dialogue or conflict resolution. I've been working for 10 years with representatives of the Alawite community in Syria, the big Alawite families that felt marginalized by the Assads, but of course at the same time had their sons and nephews and cousins in the armed forces and the intelligence services. So they were basically the power base of the Assad regime. On the other side, tribal leaders that were opposition leaning. It was we never branded it this way, but a Sunni Alawite dialogue, and it was mainly, of course, others were also involved, but this was one of the layers of the conflict. And the fact that we worked with traditional elites, traditional families, of course, so attracted a lot of criticism from other Syrian civil society people who said, like, we are the organized civil society, why do you work with these traditional power structures? For us, the argument was, it was the urgency of the matter. These people were not empowered by any official mandate or democratically elected, but they felt like, we have to do something, we have to decrease the level of violence, we cannot wait for any international settlement, and we cannot wait for the track one, the political leaders, to come to a conclusion. So we discreetly operate and build bonds based on historical ties. So, of course, this became a more and more inclusive process. We met in various European countries, also in Italy a couple of times. and more less traditional leadership came to the table, and also women were involved in this. I never bought the argument that the fact that women are involved in the negotiations leads to a better outcome. I think regardless of what this outcome is, they have a right to be represented equally, regardless if they are the better negotiators or more peaceful in their minds. You know, this is not something that I would like to I sometimes find these studies and reports that come out about inclusive peace building, they are very teleological. They want to demonstrate that there's a certain goal, and regardless if this is if scientifically proven, representation is their right in these negotiation processes. I think we also need to discern if we are dealing with, if you want to establish a negative peace, or if we want to establish a positive peace. If you want to establish a negative peace and say, like, let's stop the war, let's stop the fighting, because the negative peace, by definition, is the absence of war, that's one thing. Then you do elite transactional negotiations. You bring in the spoilers that you would otherwise not like to strengthen in a negotiation process. But if you want to establish a positive peace, and I think that's more the European approach, then of course you need to address the core roots, and you need to bring in like municipalities, NGOs, traditional civil society. You need to bring a plethora of actors, and you also, of course, need to bring in the spoilers. It's probably a bit generic to say that, but what I found a very important element that is difficult to scientifically quantify or qualify is respect. To bring respect also to the spoilers, to everyone who engages in a dialogue process, and not to be suspicious about the agenda that people pursue when they come to the table. Everyone has an agenda. If the agenda of a Syrian intelligence officer was to do something good, to silently show that he's not part of the system, that he's not pro-Assad, or was his intention to find some sort of an exit, a plan B, whatever people's motivation is to participate in dialogue processes, as long as it's not just like immediate financial gains, of course, which is also a problem because it sometimes happens. It's another issue. Should remain sometimes in the gray area, and I do not have to ask them if they are. You know, this is why I prefer sometimes the Catholic world is more useful for that kind of negotiations, because the Protestants tend to ask you, are you really a believer? The Catholics, you know, are more fine with the ritual, and you can demonstrate that you're part of the community, and that's fine.
Daniel, can I stop you
yes, of course.
On the word respect? Because I heard also the word trust, several, and probably the word respect means something listening, seeing, you know, being able. And I'm glad that Lara will speak after you, because you made, you actually, as a feminist, I was very pleased that women have the right to be there. We don't need to justify that anything better comes out because we're there. We need to be there because we are part of whatever process is there. And I'm very happy Lara is speaking after you, because she's a lot more competent than I on replying and kind of dig deeper into the issue. Thank you.
I will try to dig deeper and trying also to be brief, because I know we are running a little bit out of time. Now, on your first part of your question, who is still in the room? I think it's easier to see who's in the room, who is out. From my experience, is the very much the usual suspects. Of course, people who have relevance around the table is often said, but always end up being, you know, disproportionately very influential political and economic men, powerful groups, people who have very strong links to state institutions, armed groups, of course, established elites. The vast majority of them are men, and very often it's because they are in a position of power, not necessarily because they are competent. Not everyone in the room is competent. And those who are notably out are civil society, but certainly women. The list is long. And I fully agree that women have the right to be there, because they represent 50% of the population. But it's not just about rights. We also have to recognize that women have, and they bring to the table a different perspective. And I'm thinking of Northern Ireland or Colombia, where the women who brought issues, more social issues, at the table of the negotiations that ended up in a peace agreement. They were relevant for building the peace after, but also because the women, and I know there is a lot of mediators around this room, and we work very closely with the Women Mediators Network as well. So, you know, the mediators that we know, they have a specific expertise. So not having them at the table means you're losing out. But of course, it's not about gender only, it's also about power. In track one, the chair, it's very important. One thing that it's, to the second part of your question, what needs to be done? I think, you know, we have the normative framework. I think everybody knows by now what the Women, Peace and Security Agenda is and what it says and why it came about. We have the evidence, and I think the women's group came out with the evidence because they had to make the point. Despite the normative framework, they had to prove that they, so, you know, always cited 35% more successful quotation. So but we do have the evidence. What we are lacking is international mechanism to impose the, and I use the word impose on purpose, the participation of women at the table, which is difficult. You don't have international mechanism, and very often the priorities of mediators is that to trying to bring those around the table which are relevant, but and those who are relevant very often are not women, because you do need, you are under the pressure to bring people, parties to the table. But I've seen in the case of Syria, in particular, where Staffan de Mistura was the one who created the Women Advisory Board. Now, it's good in Syria, might have different methods of working in other contexts, but the mediator itself found the blockage from the parties, and it created an ad hoc mechanism. So there are possibilities to really pose, but we need a mechanism. And maybe the mediators themselves of all the networks that we also support, they can work on specific mechanism. Final point that I want to make is, when we're doing mediation, of course, inclusion, we always tend to focus on international mediation on track one. And there we know that the chairs are limited. So even the women who are at the table might not be fully representing the women on the ground. And we see this in Georgia, we see this in Transnistria. I saw in my previous also work on other conflicts. We also need to ensure there is inclusivity, and in the other layers, at track 2, at track 3, where a lot of the preparatory work is being done. The main issue, and there you do have, especially women's society, women working, for example, on violence, working on community services. But what we don't have there is real gender equality. Very often we have women dealing with soft issues, men around the table to deal with hard issues. Where we need to work is to make sure that all the tables are inclusive. So I would like to see women discussing security sector reform and men discussing education or humanitarian access in track 1, track 2, and track 3 on an equal level, because that is when you are actually building inclusive mediation processes. Over to you.
Lara, thank you. I think you are asking for
Miracle.
a cultural revolution. A cultural evolution. We are fighting millennia of patriarchy here, because that is a genderification of roles that duplicates. And we cannot, I have to say, we cannot never forget that whatever process is in mediation, it's immersed in the culture where you are pulsing. And so all that culture enters the room sooner or later, or even rather it's very difficult to bring it out. So But we will fight for that kind of miracle or revolution, let's call it, in a more pragmatic way. Lamberto, please.
Let me just
yeah, go if you
just
can
one
continue.
in relation to this. I still remember in Kosovo we set up a program of cooperation, business women, Kosovo Serb and Kosovo Albanian. We tried with men, it didn't work. We tried with women, it was excellent, really. So all the support, all the support. Now, who is missing in the room? My first question is, what room are we talking about? We have seen now power politics, big boys play, and I'm saying boys and not girls actually, playing their own games. Mediation that is becoming increasingly transactional. You know, mediation usually should be a win-win for the sides you're working on to mediate between. And now the mediator seems to be the one who expects the biggest reward from what we're seeing. Natural resources, you know, whatever, rare earths or oil or Nobel Prizes, whatever. Yeah. And, you know, so that's not really mediation in my view, that's business deals. And the risk is that also we see agreements that are very superficial. You know, ceasefire at best, and then everything underneath is not solved. And so, you know, at some point things will restart, or the solutions that are found are worse than the problem in the beginning that you were trying to correct. So this is creating, first of all, a space for engagement, or a need for engagement, to ensure that whatever deals are made, they really are effective. So there is a lot of work still to be done. How to do it and how to intervene is the big problem. The space who takes the lead and all that. In the UN, I remember there was a network, an informal network of ministers dealing with mediation. It was the informal mediation breakfasts. They used to call them in the margins of every General Assembly, which brings together a group of what you would call, you know, mid-powers, sort of, and led by Turkey and Finland at the time. I don't know if it's still the same now. Still the same. And with a number of countries that really invest a lot on mediation. Perhaps networks of this kind could be used more operationally to look at, you know, unsolved situations where you need to invest more, where you need to intervene and act as, how can I say, engines in a way for future operations built around an inclusive coalition of the willing. I'm very cautious with the terms of coalition of the willing, because sometimes you build a coalition of the willing around a political objective, which then defeats the whole point of trying to be, you know, neutrally engaged in helping solve the problems. So that's perhaps one direction in which to try to move. The other is coalition between different kinds of actors. So on the one hand, you have geography, engaging with perhaps countries and actors that are very disparate, very different. You know, countries that still engage a lot in peace support activities, and then they still fund them, because funding is one of the issues, of course. So trying to bring in these actors as well. And the other, try to build coalitions between more institutional actors and more informal or grassroots organizations. Again, respecting the mandate, so without really forcing, how can I say, interpretations or roles that are not really natural, but getting to know each other and exploring possibilities to interact more effectively on the ground.
Thank you. Getting to know each other. Well, establishing relationship is always probably the way to go to really push forward any process of this kind. And I like very much the fact of using this informal network that always generate how we can harness the potential of this type of network that are there. And I'm very happy, Luca, that you are closing this question, because being the focal point for women, peace and security, youth, peace and security, probably you represent the Italian position on who should be in that room, whatever room we are talking about. Please, Luca.
Thanks, Gabriella. Allow me to twist the question, because I think you got the list by now with all the answers you received from the distinguished speakers. I will try to focus on the why all these categories are relevant. So why the women, I think Daniel has said it very eloquently. Yes, there is academic evidence that peace agreements, when women are on the table or at the table, are more effective and durable, but that's not the point. The point is in numbers. I'm sorry, I have a degree in econometrics, so I like numbers in general. And if you have 50% of the population, it is inconceivable that you have less than 10% of women mediators and negotiators around. It should be close to 50. So if it's 10, there is a big gap, and this gap is structural. Why young people? Well, first of all, the same can be said, especially in many conflict settings. The vast majority of the population is made of young people, and it's equally inconceivable that these people are the victims of conflict and they don't have a say in solving it. And the YPS agenda, let's remember that, was born in 2015 with Resolution 2250 precisely to address this gap. Previously, youth were only considered as, potential terrorists or would-be agitators. And now with the set of 4 resolutions, and I want to stress the 4th one, because having 2807 agreed upon in the Security Council with 15 votes in favor and 0 against is something that doesn't even look like 2025, and yet it is. So it means that even our very much criticized international institutions sometimes can do some very good work. And the same applies to the Pact for the Future, by the way. So I'm just mentioning this so that we remember that not everything is to be criticized. And then I would like to add the role of local and community actors. I think localization will be increasingly important in the debate over the next few years, because all these agendas are wonderful, but they have to get out of the capital cities and the New Yorks and the Genevas. They have to get to the actual ground where things happen, and not necessarily good things. And finally, mentioning the informal actors, this includes, of course, tribal leaders, but I would also like to recall the importance of religious actors, sometimes neglected, but in many of the conflict situations, you cannot move an inch without religious actors being fully involved and in the picture, also in terms of decision-making powers. Italy, again, I'd like to conclude with a word on what we do. We have made concrete commitments through the national action plans, 5th national action plan now on women, peace and security, and first ever national action plan on youth, peace and security, which was adopted last month, and which brings Italy to be the 2nd country in the European Union to have a national action plan on YPS. The key feature of that plan, apart from its mere existence, is also the fact that the entire actions chapter, which consists of 15 actions, has been drafted by youth organizations. So we have not touched the text. They have been the ones drafting it, and now the institutions are in the process of finding best ways to implement those needs and requests by the youth themselves. What changes when the inclusion is genuine? Well, the short answer is durability. A mediation process is only as strong as its ability to reflect the complexity of the parties it seeks to bring together. So I believe that diversity, whichever diversity, of gender, of generation, of cultural perspective, is the foundation of a credible process. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We still have 15 minutes in my time. No, don't look at the agenda. We started later. We had 90 minutes. I saw the people and I didn't want. But before we close, I'd like to take like one question or two questions from the audience. And I see the brave one, please. No, he was first. So please, sir, one question and I can take another one. And the second one was the lady there. I'm sorry, but on the back there and there. Apologies not to take all the questions because unless EP gave me free rein to invade the rest of the symposium. Please go ahead. To whom would you like to ask the question?
I like to ask Elisabetta and Daniel. And thank you very much for seeing my hand raised up early. I'm Akia. I'm a student at the University of Padova, and I'm studying communication strategies, which is completely different from what I'm attending now. I have a question. You know, when you talk about peace, it's completely different from my experience living in Ethiopia, and then here is completely different. Just to give you a brief example, during New Year's there is always fireworks. So what we understand peace is when I hear about fireworks, like huge fireworks, I see Italians are having fun and celebrating New Year. But for me and my friends, we always sneak out our heads and then to see whether there is a trouble, a problem, or something else. So my question is, when you are not in a peaceful continent, how do you try to solve this? How can you handle peace mediation that being in that situation? And then the other question is, Ethiopia is like structured in a ethnic federalism. So when I was growing up, there was no such a thing as ethnic federalism. We grew up. I didn't know my ethnic background. I didn't know my friend's ethnic background. But we grew up together, and then all of a sudden, guerrilla fighters came to power, and then sliced the country into, and then redraw regions, and even some 30 years ago, an American military attaché wrote a book saying that university professors were complaining that the country should not be sliced based on ethnicity and language, but this guy wrote a book saying that the country, redrawing the country based on language and ethnicity doesn't make any effect on the cohesiveness of Ethiopian, but after 30-40 years, what is happening. So in this situation, how can you resolve this ethnic language-based conflicts? Because I went to South Tyrol, and I met very nice people, and then I invited them. If they come to Padova and Venice, I can accompany them, and then their response was, "Where? To Italy? We're not coming to Italy." And then I was very shocked and said, "Where am I? Am I back to Ethiopia, or am I really in Italy?" So how did you solve this problem? And if I'm allowed, one last
one
question.
Second, because I've been very strict with them. I'm going to be very strict also with the audience.
Yes. An agronomist expert was talking about going to Africa and then planting tomato in a riverside, and the people were chilling and relaxing and doing nothing, and then they complained and redesigned and then proposed a plan to plant a tomato, and then after the harvest is ready, because they were complaining that the people are very lazy. But the reason why they were very lazy is that the hippos living in the riverside came out after everything is ready and ripped and beautiful. just walked on it and it destroyed everything. So in this peace mediation, what is exactly are you failing when you apply and engaged in peace mediation?
Okay, I think. Did you get? Okay. I will also collect the last one. Can I ask to be focused on the question? Thank you very much for your contribution. And Ethiopia was my first deployment when I was very, very young. So I still have a kind of, the first love you never forget.
Hello, I'm Isabella. I'm from the Gender Studies Department at Central European University. And I have to say I'm very pleased to be here in this session today and very hopeful with all your words and your work as well. And I've been working trying to bridge this gap between the interaction of global actors and local actors in sustaining cycles of violence and conflict. And for me, the question for you, I think this first question is more a general one. For me, it's not only who is in the room, but also how do you or have you addressed the role of international actors in your states in fueling conflict, violence, and sometimes even benefiting from all of these cycles in this mediation and conflict prevention processes, because we know that this country, like European states, sometimes are also like part of this global system that is sustaining this conflict and sustaining violence. And also, Lara told about was that like, for example, in Latin America and in Syria, there are like different mediation tools that we have to use. And I think like there are a lot of difference between like these different contexts on the global south. But at the same time, as a Brazilian, I've been analyzing conflict in Africa, violence in Africa, and every time I do a different research and I go deeper, I realize how many similarities we have. And I have been like, I wanted to ask if, are we looking at the similarities also about across South regions? Because there is a lot of global powers structuring in the same ways. And as the colleague said about the fireworks, as a Brazilian also, sometimes I'm always scared that is a shooting or something like this, and how we have different perceptions of what is peace, what is violence. But in South-South relations, we can really see a lot of similarities that maybe can help to build more effective solutions. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think the one called for this are Elizabeth, Daniel, and Lara for this question. We have 10 minutes before we finish, so I will. Who would like to start? A couple of minutes, very flashing report. Yeah, let's start with the first question.
Together I think the question is, and I made it before, is responding to the needs on the ground. I think the starting point is how do you address these issues, that you have to look very much at the specificity, whether of that particular context. I mean, we are here making some general overarching recommendations, but I think the most important aspect when you do mediation, when you try to address it, is of course to look very much at the specificity of the context. And this is also relates, at least this is from my experience and the points that I made before. I think especially when it comes to women empowerment and women participation in peace processes, again, at different levels, there is a huge wealth of expertise out there on what works and what doesn't work. I don't believe in cut and paste solutions, but what we do extensively with the OEC is to bring together, because we've got 57 countries, and many of them, and a number of them have been through conflict. So we bring women mediators and peace builders, for example, from Ukraine and Bosnia-Herzegovina to talk about the consequence, how to deal with conflict-related sexual violence. Or we bring together women from Kosovo and from Serbia, young women from Kosovo, Serbia, to do to talk about conflict to talk about peace. So these are all, so we're trying to leverage the expertise that is there in order to push the agenda forward, but then always, again, in the context of respecting the specificity of a conflict, because otherwise we are, rather than finding solutions, from my experience, we're actually replicating mistakes. So that's a risk.
Shall we address the question of our... can you pass the microphone to Daniel and Elizabeth? You can use mine as well. He gave me a bigger one.
You know, you're an expert on communication strategy. That is actually very closely related to mediation, because in mediation and peace building, you work discreetly very often, but you always have to have a communication strategy and make sure that information comes out. So I think you're very much much closer to this awkward craft of peace building and mediation in your expertise. I just happened to pen a book, I've published it last year, about 3,500 years of peace building in the Middle East. And since the time of Ramses II until the Oslo Agreement, or let's say the Abraham Accords. And the issue of like the terminology again is so crucial. What do people actually mean when they say peace, when they talk about peace? In Arabic, and I'm just like, it's important for expectation management. In Arabic, there is at least 5 different words for different kinds of temporary truces, peace, like the commonly known word salam is just is a very general. It's not a concrete peace treaty or concrete arrangement. It's a very general human condition, let's say, connected to well-being, health, and what I think comes close to the concept of positive peace, not negative peace. And it's very important when we talk about negotiations between Syria and Israel today, for example. Maybe Ahmad Shara is not up for an eternal peace. He's up for what's called in Arabic a sulh, which is a concrete political peace treaty between 2 powers, the way that the Prophet concluded a sulh at the time with the enemies of Islam, the Quraysh in Mecca, because he knew that I cannot defeat them anyways. So if you can't beat them, join them and build up your force until you're strong enough to finally defeat them. This is not what people have in mind when they talk about peace. And I think it's very important to understand the terminology and, as I mentioned in the beginning, the local context. When we talked about youth inclusion on that subject also, it's not important only to include different people because they have a right to sit at the table, but include their perspectives. I worked with Syrian Alawites and tribal leaders, and they had a very sectarian vision and very ethno-sectarian vision of the foundation of the conflict. And then once we told them, bring your kids, please bring your next generation to the table. And there was a bunch of 20-year-olds sitting around the table. And the elders were talking about ta'ifiyya, the sectarianism, and the younger ones at one point they said, like, what the hell are you talking about? They had many of them had lived abroad, and they had a completely different notion of what's the problem. And given the fact that you have a country that has a a very young population, it's also important to understand what that part of the population thinks.
Thank you. Elizabeth, would you like to complement and provide a final?
Yeah, I think there's...
It was very complex, the question that you asked.
No, I think there's three issues. Obviously, we cannot go into detail. One issue is also linked with the question what we can still do, and I think we can still do a lot. Because, I mean, just taking examples like Ethiopia or other countries that are still in an open conflict means that you might not be able to come in with the track 1 international mediation, with the highest one, because that's linked to the mandates, you know, and then you have some issues. Academia can write some shadow reports, non-papers, and we do that regularly. But and in these non-papers, in these shadow reports, we point out that you need to coordinate much more. But what also can be done by working on track 2 and track 3 is basically working with those in the countries where the war or the conflict is still ongoing, that
built up structures, because in any country which has an ongoing conflict and war, you have parts that have to have an administration that goes on. For example, the Karenni state in Myanmar has a totally functioning subnational kind of capacity to run the Karenni state. Okay, Myanmar is still under military rule, and there is an agenda between the European Union and other international actors with the government in exile. But still, working with the Karenni state means that then a large population, because it's many peoples, are then really prepped for the time afterwards. That's point one. And point two is that the issue of federalism or decentralization has been a lot used in the last 100 years to basically come to negative peace. We decentralize power, we create a federal structure, we can call it federalism, and we might not call it federalism in many countries, so we call it also decentralization, because then we put language groups, ethnicities, religious group apart, and that creates negative peace. The shortest definition of federalism is self-rule plus shared rule. So self-rule plus shared rule is the shortest definition of federalism. And very often this part of shared rule is too often missing. Missing in analysis done by the academics, but missing also in the attention of either track 1, 2, or 3 mediation. Because you dissect to stop the war. Happened in Bosnia-Herzegovina, the same. But it's basically, you cannot reform the country because it's so much self-rule that in the end you have difficulties via mediation processes to convince those that are in power to really talk to each other and to push through constitutional reforms that really go and make a more participatory governance in that sense.
Thank you very much. Okay, the time is over. I will give you for 30 seconds statement. Since they are Italian, I'm biased, and I will give the words. And to Lamberto and Luca, please, I really 30 seconds just to...
On the subject of better communicating between different constituencies, this issue of diversity and ethnicity and whatever, in the OSCE there is an institution which is the High Commissioner on National Minorities that over 25 years has developed a set of recommendations on integration within diverse societies. These recommendations deal with all aspects, language, education, participation, policing, justice, relations between states that have the king states of minorities in other countries, etc. The recommendations based on best practices, on expert recommendations, etc., which are kept very close to the chest of the High Commissioner. It is time to put them at the disposal of the broader community. And to have, I myself went to a meeting of the African Union in New York. I invited regional organizations, the Arab League, again the African Union, ASEAN, American states, etc., to start discussing these things and see how diversity is dealt with in various parts of the world in a conflict prevention, post-conflict stabilization mode. I think in the future we will have to learn how to work together on these things better as well.
Thank you very much, Lamberto. I take to heart the words you've said. Luca.
Answering part of Isabella's question, I think South-South relations are crucial. And in the current situation, the South, global South, must do more in order to advance these agendas globally. And for this very reason, and with this in mind, for example, we, Italy, organized 2 events at CSW last year and this year on the nexus between the WPS and YPS agendas, and we did it respectively with the African Union last year and with the OSCE and Kyrgyzstan this year. And this year in June, we are going to host in Rome the network of WPS focal points, and we co-chair it with the Philippines. So the attempt there is to involve as many countries as possible, not from the usual suspects, but from the rest of the world.
Thank you, Luca. And we conclude here. I'd like really to thank you all for, first of all, for the insight you share and for the tolerance you show to me. Usually I'm a lot nicer when I'm not, tasked to managing the time. I hope we will have time during coffee break to exchange largely. Thank you very much, and thank you to every one of you.
sai i gesti che mi facevo. Questo è suo, Gabriella?
Ah sì, grazie, perché sennò io il tempo mi faccio sempre queste cose, sennò non riesco a finire.
Darf ich das sagen? Okay, Entschuldigung.